Raiding is one of the most amazing gameplay experiences World of Warcraft has to offer. I think. I've only ever done it once, and I thought it was pretty cool. So many bosses, so much loot, so many big gear upgrades, seeing your performance improve as the weeks go on. And my guild is holding a Molten Core and Onyxia run tonight for socials, alts, pugs, and fart and sniff if he wants. But last week, I never got to do Onyxia since I wasn't attuned. But this week, that changes, because I will actually give myself enough time to get attuned and get all of the buffs and items that I need. In case you haven't watched any of my previous videos, then I would like to introduce you to my character, Fart and Sniff. Last week, I only gave myself a single day to prepare for raiding, but this week, I've given myself multiple days like a responsible member of society. Firstly, I need to get attuned for Onyxia, which is a way longer process than getting attuned for Molten Core, making me enter multiple instances and complete a long string of quests. Secondly, I need to get all of my world buffs, Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer, War Chief's Blessing, all of the Dire Maul buffs, and the Fellwood Flower buff. Last week, I wasn't able to get myself the War Chief's Blessing buff since I didn't leave myself enough time, so I'm looking forward to seeing what difference it can actually make. And lastly, I need to get 3 engineering items that would help during the raid: Battle Chicken Trinket, Dense Dynamite, and Sapper Charge. But before all of that nonsense, we have some business to take care of first. This is the week that Fart and Sniff is finally rank 11. And I know I haven't featured any Battlegrounds content, but do you really want to sit and watch 400 Battlegrounds in a row? Nah, I didn't think so. But rank 11 means that I can get my epic mount, and for only 95 gold. How epic. So we come up the back here. Oh baby. I am Commander, what do you mean? Commander Fart and Sniff. Look at it. Holy moly. I mean, that is... Woo! We are speedy now. Damn! With all of the excitement about the epic mount out of the way, I decided to start working on getting attuned for Onyxia, and luckily I had done a small amount of the quests already from leveling, and we were on the Marshal Windsor quest, where we would need to venture into Blackrock Depths and find him inside of a jail cell in there. Unfortunately though, this quest chain doesn't have masses of groups looking to get it done, so to make it just a little bit easier, I decided that it was time to start learning how to tank again, since it would be incredibly useful down the line. And I say again because I stopped tanking at like level 45. Now the part where we originally turn in the quest, I lost the footage for, which is very on character for me, but basically all we had to do is find him in his stony little jail cell and turn the quest in. Then we needed to pick up a crumpled note from one of these slaves outside the dungeon, then go back into the dungeon and kill Angerforge plus Golem Lord to pick up 2 quest items, then return them to Marshal Windsor and begin the quest Jailbreak, which is a very boring and long interaction where he wanders around the dungeon for a while and we open up certain jail cells in an area that we had cleared prior, until we eventually get to the end part where we freed his friend. And the entire thing didn't take as long as I thought, only around 45 minutes, but I was fully expecting to be here for several hours. Next we needed to meet Marshall outside of Stormwind Gates, and it's very rare, but this is the exact type of quests that suck, as we first had to wait for around 15 minutes until the quest reset, and then we needed to RP walk for an hour and a half until we eventually reached Stormwind Keep, where Onyxia would appear and summon a load of dragon thingies that I assume you're supposed to kill with a group, but me and this other guy just sat and watched the Stormwind guards get annihilated until it was done. Now at this point, we had already been on this for a couple of hours, so you would think that we were done now. I mean, we've confronted Onyxia and everything. But no, this is WoW Classic, and we were now sent off to Winterspring for some reason to meet a Blood Elf, who then sends us all the way to Upper Blackrock Spire for a full run, which would take a minimum of an hour to complete. Once we were in the dungeon, we got started straight away with clearing out all of these little rooms in order to progress through the dungeon. We then make our way into the next room and took down that boss. And of course, True Strike's shoulders dropped after I spent 3 days farming for them. We carefully get past the eggs, trying not to trample them, and spawn a gazillion drakes right on top of us. Unfortunately for the casters, there was no Jed Rune Watcher though. We then head down to Rend, and since this was a full run, there was no hard reserve on any items, which means that I could have a chance to get Dalren's Sacred Charge, which would be such a good upgrade for me. But yeah, I guess that was expected. Second to last is the Beast, which is still my most favourite name for any mob in this game. And lastly, we make it to General Dracasath, who we got down nice and easy. No Painweaver's band though, but we looted the quest item and then made our way back to Winterspring to complete the Onyxia attunement. Now that we had finished with the Onyxia attunement process, we could now start to work on getting our world buffs. Now, Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer I could get at pretty much any time of the day. The Fellwood Songflower buff I had already done, and you guessed it, I lost the footage for it. So, I headed to Dire Mall in order to get the 3 buffs from there. Now, I'd only done this once before, and I did needed help to get me around the place, but this time I did manage to do the entire thing by myself. And lastly, of course, is the War Chief's Blessing buff. Now this is a pretty weird one because it is a horde only buff, just like Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer for the Alliance, except it drops everywhere in the Barrens and it drops on every layer. Now how did the Alliance get it? Well, I have to work with a member of my guild who will be on a second account on a horde character, who I believe we refer to as cappers, because they will use an item called the Gnomish Mind Control Cap to mind control me and technically turn me into horde for 20 seconds. And we have to time it so that in that 20-second span, the War Chief's Blessing will drop, which is so cool. And it's these stupid and weird interactions that make Classic so much fun to play. So that leaves us with one more thing to get done before the raid, and that is to acquire my engineering items. Now looking back on this, I probably could have gotten this done before the raid last week, because it was a very simple case of just crafting the dynamite. And for the sapper charges, turns out I would never be able to craft them since they are part of the Goblin Engineering specialization and I was part of the Gnomish specialization. So I literally just had to buy them from the auction house. And lastly, the Battle Chicken, which was once again just a case of a small trip to Ironforge and visiting the Master Engineer who would allow me to learn the recipe to craft it. So here we are, fully prepared for once with all of our buffs and consumables and items, which I know technically aren't necessary, but if everyone puts in the effort to get them, then it just makes everything go smoother. I start to experience that pre-raid nervousness, hoping that I will live up to the standard of the Spectrum Guild. And after a short wait for everyone to arrive, we set a pull timer and start to pull the first 2 mobs. So what are my goals in raiding for tonight? Well, obviously get any gear upgrades that I can, but more importantly, I would love to try and not die this time, since last week I ended up exploding to a random elemental, which I know is my fault, but for the sake of my ego, we can all just blame the healers. We then jump down onto this side part, which allows us to skip a significant amount of mobs and start clearing our way to Lucifron. It's worth noting that I have soft reserved 2 items. The Striker's Mark, a very nice bow which will increase my attack power and give me another 1% to hit. And I also soft reserved the Onslaught Girdle, which is an absolutely insane waist piece, giving me an absolute load of strength and also an extra 1% hit and crit. Continuing on our way over to Lucifron, we first had to clear out some big packs of dogs, which I didn't realize at first, but they all have to die at the same time. This is also the perfect chance for us to use these sapper charges we had brought. We then pull the boss Lucifron, who gets absolutely deleted in like 10 seconds, but he did drop Gauntlets of Might, which I believe had no one soft reserving it, so we do have a chance at getting that once the raid was over. On the next 2 packs of dogs, we actually struggled to get them all down at the same time at first, but we did get there in the end after a little bit of coordination. Pulling Magmadar now, who is literally just a massive dog dog with a lot of health. He doesn't get deleted nearly as fast as Lucifron though. He does technically have a mechanic where he will fear a load of players, but there's really nothing threatening to run into here, so it really is just wasting our time. And would you look at that? Striker's Mark dropped, which would be absolutely huge if we do actually win it. Next we take on Gehennis, who doesn't do much, but he does have 2 ads protecting him, and he will use an ability called Rain of Fire, which is just a runaway mechanic, and he will also place a healing debuff onto players. Pretty simple stuff. Next we head on over to take out Gar. Now this boss really isn't much either. He comes with a load of ads, which simply need to be tanked away from Gar whilst we nuke him down. He will slow players for 15 seconds, but that's really all there is to it. Now the hardest part of this fight I would say is actually the ads, since they have an ability called Separation Anxiety, which will cause the ads to deal 300% additional damage if they are tanked too far away from Gar. And I just have to say, the name of this ability fits perfectly. They will also explode on death, which I learned from last week not to charge directly into them. After a few minutes of clearing, we eventually make it to Baron Geddon, the boss that is responsible for killing Tyler 1 during the OnlyFangs raid. Now I would say this is a very simple fight. He will use Inferno, which is just giant pulsing flames that come out of him, which simply means back away from him. Then he will apply Living Bomb to a player, which will cause the holder and everyone else around them to explode and be knocked up. And it's simple to deal with. If you have it, just walk away. To get to the next boss, Shazra, we literally just have to walk a few feet across the room. Again, this is a pretty easy fight. He will apply a debuff which increases magic damage taken, and he will also cast Arcane Explosion every 4 seconds, so a little bit of synergy between the abilities here, which is kind of cool. As we are heading to the next boss, we pass over the bridge, which is the location where I died the last time, and I think I might actually know what killed me, and I believe these elementals leave behind fire, which is what I was standing directly inside of, which has brought me to the conclusion that it's the tank's fault. Next is Sulfuron Harbinger, who comes with 4 ads, all of which have abilities that don't do enough damage for me to care about. Sulfuron himself will leave a little stun on players, and he will also inspire his allies, which will cause them to deal some extra damage and attack a little faster. Overall, this fight seemed perfectly fine. As we slowly reach the end of the raid, we go and take down the very easy boss, Golemag. He literally just has a lot of health. The only notable mechanic is his Earthquake ability, where at 10% health he starts to pulse raid damage, but I'm gonna be totally honest, I didn't even notice it. Second to last, we go and take down Major Domo Executus, who the first time around I had no idea how this fight worked. The second time around I have no idea how this fight works, but we gather up all the ads and they are doing raid damage. I assume I'm attacking the mobs like you would expect, and then suddenly I catch aggro and die. The day will come when Fartin Sniff doesn't die during a raid. But whose fault was it? Well, I'm still not entirely sure, but it was probably my fault. But we are going to blame the tank, since accountability isn't a word in World of Warcraft players' vocabulary. And lastly, of course, we head over to kill Ragnaros. Now, Ragnaros really doesn't have any sort of mechanic that requires us to take any action, so we can literally just stand and stab. And with that, we had cleared Molten Core in 30 minutes. We all take a lovely portal to Ironforge in order to start rolling for the loot. Although I was feeling a bit down because I had died and lost all of my buffs, I was quickly cheered up by the sight of loot. And the first item to roll on was the Gauntlets of Might, who we hit with a fat 72 roll, but we still lost to an 86. But no matter, since we still had the big Striker's Mark to roll on. Gauntlets of Might were kind of an extra on top, but if we win Striker's Mark, it would be so big for us, which we hit with a big 14 roll. Well, 2 weeks, no loot. I guess that's alright, because we still have Onyxia to take down for my first time forever. Once we have received our summon to Onyxia's lair, we once again patiently wait for everyone to arrive, and once everyone was here, I start to experience that slight pre-raid nervousness again. But we were here, and although we didn't have any world buffs to help us pump damage, we still had a few minutes left on our consumables, so those would have to do. Now, unlike the first time I did Molten Core, I actually did do some research before entering the raid, and turns out there are 3 phases. Once we pull the boss, we are of course entering phase 1, and it's as simple as it gets really. All we have to do is stand here and DPS her from the side, because if we stand behind her, she will hit us with a tail sweep, a simple ability that deals damage and knocks the players back. After a few minutes and 0 deaths so far, we enter the second phase of the fight, where she will fly up above the raid and loads of whelps will start to attack us from the side. And of course, my job is to just DPS them down. That is not all for phase 2 though, because Onyxia will continuously send fireballs into players' faces, so we all just have to spread out and take the hits, whilst the ranged DPS continue to attack her. Once Onyxia reaches 45% health, she will enter phase 3, which I believe is pretty much the same as phase 1, except whelps will attack us from the side again, and she also gains a fear ability. So, pretty fun and engaging fight. It is short, but I think that's okay. And since I was the only person to soft reserve the head of Onyxia, we could accept the quest it offers and turn it in and receive the Onyxia Tooth Pendant, which is an insane piece of gear that would greatly help me in the future. Hope you all enjoyed today's video because I enjoyed making it. I always do. I apologize for the slight absence. It's been, I think, 10 days since I last posted, which is the longest I've gone in a long time. Reason for that is I actually did make another video, but I hated it, so I never uploaded it. I was kind of thinking, if I ever decide to do something with the membership feature, then one thing that you could get access to with that is like deleted and unreleased videos. Again, I don't know if that's something you guys are interested in. If it is, let me know in the comments and I can maybe see about getting that up and going, making exclusive content and stuff like that. Anyway, I will stop yapping now. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all later.